Yes.
All right. So, welcome everybody. Um, we've got 17 on Zoom. We've got 12 on Facebook. That's an amazing turnout. I'm just really excited about these virtual meetings and how many people are able to participate with us. And we want to welcome you. Tonight's speaker is going to be a dual speaker in Mike Lenetsky and Josh Filter. They've spoken in front of the club several times, and I think you're going to really enjoy not just them, but their style. It's really fun, uh, the way they both kind of team present. So we're looking forward to that. But before we get started, we're all jazzed up. The picture was taken on Friday. Fishing season is here, spring is here, and just to remind you that we'll have a virtual spring all the way through May, and we've got exciting news to share on our May speaker, but that'll be a little later. If you're on Zoom, if you just be careful to keep your mic on mute. If you don't, then TC will help with that. Um, you need to be aware that you select your view. We recommend that you go side by side or speaker view. And that's what TC is using to stream to Facebook. Please feel welcome to participate. That makes it a meeting. We're an organization. So we want to participate. Just take your mic off and mute and don't interrupt. Just ask your question at the right time. For those of you on Facebook, just feel free. We're monitoring Facebook comments. So please feel free to share a little banter between buddies on Facebook. And feel free to ask questions. And Bob Carlson or myself or other board member will be passing those along via Zoom. So we'll just pass those along, and we want you to feel as valued as the folks that are linked in through Zoom. So tonight, Eric Masterbirdy is going to be doing the fly tying, and we get to be graced by him again. And he's got a cool Thunder Creek streamer to share with us. Then when Eric's done, I'll share a few club announcements, and then we'll roll right into Josh and Mike's presentation right when I'm done. So with that, let's turn it over to Eric Masterbirdy. He is now one of the good fly tyers in our club. He's a guide, and am I allowed to say, Eric, has recently taken a new role, a new job?
Yeah. Well, I will be taking a new job starting a week. Yeah. I'll be working for the Fingerless Land Trust out of Ithaca. So I get to do a lot of land preservation, which is pretty important to me. So I'm looking forward to starting kind of a new path. But good to be back. I feel like I've been hanging out with you folks a lot this past, I don't know, few months. But I'll be doing a fly for you folks because I know that the FFI likes to start their programs off that way. Mike reached out to me asking if I would be willing to do one. I was happy to oblige. It's one of my confidence patterns, and if you've seen me talk before, I always focus on the importance of feeling confident about what you're fishing. If you're not feeling confident, you're probably not going to do well. And if you go into it with a mindset feeling like you're gonna you're gonna succeed, then you probably will. And there's so many patterns that exist, and the more I fish, the more I find myself gravitating to a small number of patterns and maybe a few variations. And so I'll be tying a Thunder Creek minnow tonight. It's a Keith Fulsher pattern. It's not new. The way I'll be tying it is a slight deviation, I suppose, from the way he did it, but that's mainly because we have access to materials that he didn't have access to when it was originated. And I'll fish this fly in lakes, but mainly I fish it in trout streams. You know, like I said, I've been simplifying more and more the flies that I carry, and I find myself when I'm streamer fishing, either fishing this as the sort of skinny profile bait fish, and then I have some sort of deer head, sort of fat profile flies that imitate things like sculpins and gobies, that sort of thing. And this is a really streamlined fly. It's not very challenging to tie, and hopefully, you know, you like it if you're familiar with it. Cool. If you're not, it's a good one. It's and I've seen a lot of fish really respond aggressively to this. And this is actually one of my go-to spring patterns, especially for lake run rainbows. This is one where I've seen them chase it down 10, 15 feet and just inhale it. So hopefully you like it. I'm going to switch cameras, and this way you can get a better sense of what I'll be doing. Feel like that's pretty good. Just kind of fiddle with the hook a little bit. All right. So this, like I said, Thunder Creek minnow. I'll be tying this on a Mustad R75S 9674. Oh, hold on one second. Let me adjust my lighting a little bit. There we go. You may have noticed as we were kind of hanging out waiting to start, I was madly tying a fly, and that's because at the last second I changed the color that I was going to tie this fly in, mainly because I was going to do it in a lavender and white, which is this. I'll show it to you just to have a kind of visual. But I felt like the lavender and the white didn't contrast well with the camera. So I'm going to be doing a sort of a black nosed ace coloration for this fly. So this is a size 4. You can tie it as small as a 10 up to usually about a size 2. This is you know, my main size that I tend to tie it in. I'm going to start off with a dozen wraps of 0.025 lead. You can read that. And I just leave it on the spool so I don't have to waste anything. So I'll just do a dozen wraps, kind of get that out of there. And then I'll just kind of clean up the end. I'm going to leave this basically about the midway point, give or take, on the hook shank. And then I'm going to just use some 30 denier gel spun. This is Vivus. Some folks like gel spun, some folks hate it. I'm a fan of it because it's super strong. You're not going to break it, and it's very skinny. It's a very low profile thread, and so it's definitely more. I think of it as like more structural than if you were to just use a 6/0, which is also totally fine. So I can do less wraps and get a really durable kind of foundation for the fly. So I just went back and forth a few times, you saw, just to hold that lead in place and bring it back to the bend of the hook. The original pattern called for just embossed silver tinsel for the body. I'm going to be using flat diamond braid. This is sort of a tinsel. It's woven. It's really durable. You can get this in a lot of colors. I'm a big fan of this stuff. It lays nicely and is a little bit translucent. I just leave it in the bag and I just kind of have a little bit out, so I don't have to, again, fiddle with cutting pieces of it. I can just kind of use what I need, and there's zero waste out of the whole bag. So what I'm going to do, I'm leaving about maybe 1/3 of an inch off the back, just to give it a little bit of a tag. And I'm just going to keep my wraps really tight. So there's just 4 wraps. I'm going to kind of pull down, tension them. I'm going to just pull that back. I don't want to have any more wraps than I need. And I'll bring this to the front of the hook. I'm just going to do a half hitch just to hold it in place. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to try to cover those few wraps with the material so there's no exposed thread. And that way it just really helps to make this fly as durable as possible. And just one wrap in front of the other. And you'll see it'll make kind of a, with this lead, it'll make kind of a little belly of the fly, but it's pretty low profile. Doesn't impact things much. Usually he did not weight these, but he also had much heavier wire hooks than this. And we also tend to have a lot of plunge pools that I just think it fishes better. Do whatever you want, match the conditions, but I usually end up putting lead on these. Now you'll notice I didn't bring it all the way to the eye. You don't need to, because we're going to be building a pretty lengthy head on this fly. And so that's the body, right? Super simple. And all that I'm going to do is just take a bodkin and pick. This is just, like I said, a woven material. So that just gives the tail a little bit of movement, a little extra flash on the back. Super simple. Now, like I said, this is going to be black nose dace pattern. And we're going to start off with bucktail, flash, and bucktail. And that's really it. And then we're going to finish it, and finishing it's where there's kind of a trick. If any of you have tried this once or twice and it didn't quite work, maybe I can clarify some things for you. So we're going to use, this is kind of a greenish brown, like an olive brown. This is from a friend of mine, Colin Nash, who is from the Ithaca area. I've known him. We were both, in the community fly fisher program years and years ago. He was an apprentice when I was a mentor, and he's gotten into dyeing a lot of materials, bucktails, fox, marabou, and he's good. If you're looking for good quality bucktails, Colin Nash is a good person to reach out to. As an example, this is like a nice bucktail. It's like a good size, but he did some. I kind of requested some stuff from him, and this is kind of on the bigger end. I know it's blurry, but just a massive tail in comparison to like a good sized tail. And these fibers are like 7 inches long or so for some of my musky flies. So just to kind of toss that out there. This is a really sparse fly, to get back to it. And so for this, you don't need a lot of fibers, but you do want to make sure they're long enough. Just because you need to make sure that you can have it come a little further beyond the hook bend and incorporate about 1/3 of the length of the shank in the head. Okay, so just a relatively small clump. There's a million ways that you can describe how much hair in a clump of bucktail. All of them are terrible, so I'm not going to try. I'm just going to say fairly sparse. Okay, so I've pulled this clump out. Usually with bucktail, there's a bit of a curve to it depending upon how the hair sits. And so the best thing to do to mitigate that is just to roll it in your fingers and then kind of grab it, reset, roll it in your fingers, grab it. And each time you do that, you're basically undoing that curvature. You're kind of making them all go at different angles. So collectively, you end up with sort of a more straight clump. We're not going to leave it like this. You don't want to have a lot of those short fibers. We're going to just kind of pull some of that stuff out. And this is also too much hair. Okay, so we're just going to kind of clean up the fibers to start. Take a look. It's pretty good. You don't want this to be totally uniform, but I like it to be not a huge exaggerated difference in the length. So I usually go through, pull some of the longest fibers out and make them some of the shorter fibers, just so that collectively it's not dramatically different in the length. All right, that's pretty good. So to size this, what you want to do, so I'm right-handed, so I'm going to put this in my left hand, okay, with the tips facing forward, because you're going to do basically a reverse tie with this fly. So you want to have the tips basically ending where the frontmost tie-in point is going to be. You want to accommodate, you want to come back, whatever your preference is, how far back you want the hair to go. I usually like it to be about 1/3 of the hook shank beyond the bend, but then also accommodate the head, which is going to be 1/3. So it's going to be about somewhere around 1.5, about twice the length of the hook shank, right? Super complicated way to describe it, but just to make sure that when you're tying it in, you're giving yourself enough length to accommodate all those factors. Now I'm going to bring the thread right behind my eye. And I kind of got it to where I want it. And you can adjust if you tie it in and it doesn't look quite right, you can undo it pretty easily. So I'm going to just do 1, 2, just a soft loop. I have not tensioned this yet. Okay. And I'm going to come back and do it again. All right. I'm going to just tension this, kind of make sure it's sitting on top of the hook shank. Tension it a little. I'll reset it. And then I can fold it back and see that's a little too long. Fair enough. I did that on purpose, by the way, just to show you. Untie. Bring it back. Okay. So the important thing about a lot of bucktail flies, this one most certainly is the case. You want a distinct line between the top and the bottom. And so I've tensioned this just a little bit, but it's loose enough I can just pull the fibers up to the top of the hook shank. Now I can really tension this because I know that the length is right. Okay. So then I can bring it forward, tension it again. If you're hearing thumping upstairs, I apologize. That's my 3.5-year-old getting ready for a bath, and the bathroom's right above me. Sorry if you can hear that. All right. Now, one thing to point out when you're dealing with bucktail or anything you really want to tension a material, it's very common for people to be like, oh man, I broke my thread again. What a bummer. Well, usually, we're wrapping in this orientation and we pull down like this. This angle right here between where the thread comes out of the bobbin and where it straightens out, this is the reason that you break your thread a lot of times. So when you really want to tension, pull straight down, get rid of that angle, and your thread becomes much stronger that way, or it doesn't get as weak as putting that angle in it, just a tip. Because a lot of times working with bucktail, people complain about, I busted my thread again. The thread is stronger than you maybe think it is. So just a little trick. Okay, so I've done a couple tie-ins where I've really tensioned it. Now I can trim this as tight as I can. And I'll just go over a few of these fibers just to clean it up. It's going to pretty much disappear, but if you leave too much length back here, you might get some of these poking through the head, which doesn't look so good. Next, we're going to use black crystal flash. If you haven't ever tied with black crystal flash, this is going to revolutionize some tying for you. I use it with a lot of flies, just a little bit of little touch of sheen without actually having some bright, obnoxious addition to your flies. All right, so just 4 strands. I've already cut this, but basically you want this. I'm going to have 4 strands doubled. All right. This is going to be tied in after the brown, coming just a little bit further back behind the hook point. All right, looking pretty good. I'll flip it over and I like a rotary vise. I can see the fly from all angles. I can notice a couple things. Some of the fibers were out of place, and I want to tie this a little farther forward. It's a very streamlined fly. You can use a down eye hook for this. I think it diminishes that sleekness a little bit, but you really want the head to start immediately behind the hook eye. So I just came up and I put my front tying point a little further forward. Okay, looks good. Then we're going to come in with some just white. I tend to prefer the more kind of crinkly fibers compared to the really straight fibers. They also tend to be less hollow. And the advantage of a smaller diameter bucktail fiber that's got more crinkle to it, less hollowness, it doesn't flare quite as much, which is nice for this pattern. But there's a few things we can do to mitigate it if you have more flare than you are looking for. So again, we're going to do the same thing with our white. I'm going to kind of twist my finger, kind of reset just to really straighten those fibers out. Come through, some of those few longest fibers are going to get kind of blended in just to make the length a little bit more uniform. That's pretty good. If anything, you want the bottom to be a touch more sparse than the top. you've already done the work to get the length right on top. Bottom's easier. You can just kind of layer it the same length or maybe a hair shorter, but you've already done the measuring. So I'm going to just come in, tension it a little bit, bring it up to the front, and then really pull down at that point. Okay. Do it a couple more times just to make sure you're really anchoring it in place. Then trim the white off like so. Now, here's the trick. This is where people tend to get a little bit hung up. You want to make sure that your thread is sitting exactly where you want the head to end. And so typically you're looking for a third of the front third of the hook shank to be the head and the rear 2/3 the body. All right. And so I'm going to come back just a little bit further. Does it make a difference fishability wise? No, it's just an aesthetic. The big thing is if you have your thread too far forward and then you try to make the actual tie-in point further back, what you end up with is something like this, where you kind of have, you can see the black thread was up here, and then I tied it back where I actually wanted it to be. Minor, that kind of thing really bugs me to no end, but maybe it doesn't bother you. Anywho, so we have the thread where we want it. We've doubled up the black, so there's a little more in here that's going to be incorporated in. That's going to be the lateral line because this is a black base pattern. So I'm going to just take a pen, empty, and just it's the same technique as you would with any like big saltwater reverse tie bucktail. Just use that to encourage those fibers to go back. All right. You might have a few that want to go the wrong direction. That's okay. You can kind of fix them as you go along. To get the really streamlined shape, you got to kind of really pinch. You're basically going to bend that bucktail to really encourage it to go nice and straight. You're also going to want to make sure you're looking at it from different angles. The benefit for me is I can see the opposite side of the fly. That's what you guys are seeing. And I can tell the coloration looks pretty good. Nice defined split, that kind of olive to white. So now I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, pull down. Okay. Get a couple more. You can see the flared a little bit. I can fix that. There's one loose thread or fiber. I'm going to fix that. Now, I'm just like Keith Fulcher, a big fan of a little touch of red on a lot of my streamers. And so I use this material that's called Firefly Eye, I think, this stuff. And it comes in a bunch of colors. I use this a lot. This is a really weird flash. It's totally opaque. I don't use it as like what you might normally use a flash, but I use it for my gills on a lot of my streamer patterns. And so all that I'm going to do to give this just a little hint of red is tie in. And then I'll do one. I'm going to kind of go over it a few times, but that's okay. Bring it up. I'm just going to do one wrap, two, I'm going to pull it back just to kind of pinch that last wrap in between. Trim that off. Now, Keith used lacquer for his flies. I'll be using bone dry, which is, I don't know, the best, hands down, way to finish a fly I've ever come across. And I've used a ton of different glues and epoxies, and this stuff is awesome. What I'm going to do is just start by putting a little bit, and I'm going to go back just a touch from basically the gill plate back just a little bit. Okay. Then I'm going to just take those fibers. These are a little bit more flared than I want them to be, but that's okay. So I'm going to pull those back and then just do a quick second with the light. With UV, it's really important to do several shorter bursts so you don't overheat it. Now you might notice too, this looks a lot more streamlined. So I put some of that UV just back a little bit, and then I just pulled it back the way that I wanted it to. So it gives it a really nice streamlined finish. The other thing this does is it makes it so that I don't even have to do a whip finish or any kind of another knot. I can just cut the thread. And you could leave it. I'm not going to. I'm going to just do a thin coat of bone dry over the head, just to really make this fly nice and durable. It's going to add a little bit of weight to it, which is also fine. I finished that lead pretty well centralized on the body, but this is going to basically give the front third some weight as well. And so basically where the UV ends, the lead begins. So it's going to make the sort of the transition of weight pretty uniform over the course of the body. And I'm going to just not get it too close. That's that. So you can finish it. Some people, sometimes I'll do like a 3D eye. Other times I'll use bone dry black to just make some really small little eyes on here. And it's kind of a trick sometimes to get enough black without making it too big an eye. And I found if you kind of lay the bodkin just on its side, it helps to give it a little sort of a streamlined eye. And the thing that also helps that I didn't apparently do quite enough was put a base layer of Solares on, or the thin on here. So this is sort of soaking in more than I wanted it to, but that's okay. Just do it a couple times. And this, you know, if you've ever seen a black-nosed ace, I'm sure any of us have, it just has that little kind of black dimple almost of an eye. You don't need much to convey that. And that's that. You know, I might end up doing another coat of Solares, just clear over. I don't need to. But this is a super fishy little pattern that has caught me a ton of fish. So this, the kind of black-nosed ace pattern, I use a ton. The lavender and white, I use a lot, especially in the springtime. I use like a dark blue on top with some silver flash in it, especially out in the lake. Really effective. So hopefully, if you already knew the pattern, that gave you a trick or a tip or two. And if you weren't familiar with it, maybe that's another one that you can put in your fly box to, you know, give it a shot, see if it works for you. But I kind of hustled through that. Are there questions for me about any of the techniques I used or the fly in general? I'd love to answer them before we switch over to Josh and Mike doing the actual talk.
Hey, Eric, I had one question. What kind of scissors were those you were using for clipping the deer here? These
are Fiskars. These are, I think they're micro tip. These are these are my favorite scissors on the planet. They last forever, and you can see they have a very fine tip. So even though they're not the most, you know, usually fly tying tools are pretty and wicked expensive. These are like 15 bucks or something. And I've had these for several years, and they're probably as sharp today as they were when I got them, as they seem to be. And they cut through deer hair just fine, along with a lot of other sort of more abrasive materials. So yeah, I got them from probably like Joann Fabrics or something, to be quite honest. I didn't get them from a fly shop, but yeah.
Cool.
I think they're just called Fiskars micro tip scissors.
Okay, thanks. We had one other question from the chat, and that is, can you comment on whether bone dry is very different from other UV clears like Loon?
it's different. I used to use Loon a lot. I stopped because it yellowed a lot on me, even if I was using like their nice, like the appropriate light, fully charged. The Loon stuff, it shattered. I had a lot of problems with Loon stuff. As much as I liked the idea, I found that it really wasn't clear. This stuff is crystal clear, and this is a lot more durable than the Loon product. And I've used a bunch of different kinds of UV stuff, and I've really settled on Solares just because, I mean, it's super clear and way stronger than others. And this in particular is really thin, and the advantage of that is it isn't just a topical coat. It really saturates material, so it's not just sitting on top, because if it's sitting on top and you hit it on a rock or something, it's going to just shatter off. But because this is really well saturated in, it's just more structural. So yeah, I mean, I've not seen anything else even remotely close to as good as Bone Dry. So yeah, do I always fish it with eyes? Yes, I always fish it with eyes. To me, that's just an important trigger. So on trout flies, streamers, eyes, and a little bit of red are pretty crucial. Do you have to? Do whatever you want, but I do. I think somebody asked, how do I fish it? And I usually, it's either up and across and I'll just strip it back, or I'll do down and across and just kind of twitch here and there and occasionally do a few strips up, or I'll just kind of twitch it up a little bit and then let it kind of go back down in the current. And usually if I'm kind of fishing it, that's my normal approach. So down and across and just kind of twitch, twitch, twitch. And then if I fish it up a little bit, then I'll keep in contact, but just kind of let the rod go down, move a little bit slower than the current. And that's usually when I get a grab. That's, don't have to overcomplicate things. That's pretty much it. Yeah, I see that there's more chat stuff in the chat. I don't know if any of these are questions. Let me see.
I think you've hit on the questions. I'm not seeing any of them.
All right, sweet. Hello, small human. All right, I will hand it off to the actual speakers for tonight. Thanks for having me again, everyone.
Hey, I think I get it back. Thanks, Eric.
Oh, you're welcome.
TC, we're all cool.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. So I'm going to just share a few quick announcements about the club, and then we'll get Josh and Mike sharing about fly fishing the Finger Lakes. So just to share that we're planning to continue virtually whenever we would normally get together indoors. But we're really, really excited to get out and fish. And our fishing trips start in April. So I think the first one is April 24th. Our June meeting is going to be outside. And just so you know, because of COVID, we're extending the fishing trip invitations to only to club members. And we're going to hold the group size until this thing blows away. So we're just trying to be as careful as we can and apologize. We normally love bringing visitors along on our trips. And maybe with the progress of vaccines, and we'll be able to change that protocol. Our main communications, of course, is through email and our Facebook page. And just to remind you that if you want to go back and review the presentation or Eric's fly tying, a copy of that will be held on the Facebook page. And we also have a YouTube channel, and a copy will post up on the YouTube channel. Oh, by the way, TC, I forgot to tell you that's one of the things we need you to do. So I want to share that we are holding a rod raffle, and we do this every spring. It's a great moneymaker for us, and a great way for you to help the club out. What we're raffling off is, instead of picking a rod and you're gonna stuck with 1,000,005 weights, you pick the rod you want. So the only qualifications is we're going to be getting the rod from TFO, Temple Fork, and you can pick any single-handed Temple Fork rod they make. So if you win, you get choice, and you can get any single-handed rod they make. The ticket prices are there. And the drawing will be at the conclusion of our May program meeting. I'm just happy to say that we have a new, easier to use link on our PayPal or on our website. I just posted a link in both the Facebook and the Zoom chat. So if you haven't bought your rod raffle tickets and you think I'm boring, go and buy your raffle tickets right now. But I won't be very long. We have a master's fly tying class that's underway. This is for club members. It's been incredibly successful. Thanks to Matt Collins for coordinating it. We've had a spectrum of fly tyers that represent a real range of fly tying skills and kind of focuses. Mike Hogue will be our last presenter for the spring. He'll be tying and also talking about new things coming out in fly tying. If you're not familiar with Mike, he's one of our longtime club members, and he owns Badger Creek Fly Tying up in north of Ithaca. And it's a great resource for fly tying materials. And also, if you are a wet fly specialist, Mike Hogue is the man to talk to. He's got all kinds of soft tackle stuff that you won't find other places. Okay, I'm excited to share that we are starting an initiative within the club. 3 years ago, FFI National began a program called Women Connect, recognizing that women are the fastest growing demographic in our sport, and they've been holding gatherings and hosting speakers at fly fishing shows, along with webinars on the national FFI kind of scene. In February, our local council brought on Hyun. She's from New York City, a member of Juliana Anglers in New York City, which is a women's fly fishing club. And she is our council coordinator. Trout Unlimited has also started a Women Connects initiative. I believe the name is different than what I say there, but Lindsay Agnes from Rochester, really great fly fisher, is leading that. And within our club, we have 5 female members, and this is the last call. I think we've caught all our female members, but if there aren't any, please let us know. Recognizing that FFI membership covers your spouse. So if you're a male member, your wife can be a member too. We have plans underway for, I think it's the first council-wide gathering of women that we'll be hosting May 8th. Pam Walker is coordinating that for our club. So really, really cool. We're great. It's exciting to get this underway. Oh, here it is. So so there you go. There's a number of clinics and gatherings and fishing outings. We plan to host one on May 8th. Pam Walker is the contact for our club. Dee Brown is the contact for Leon Chandler TU, our partner club. And again, I'm excited. But I'm really excited to share this is next month, May 3rd, we are hosting in partnership with Leon Chandler, Trout Unlimited, Kelly Gallup. And if you are not familiar with who Kelly Gallup is, then that's pretty surprising. But Kelly Gallup revolutionized streamer fishing with the publishing of his book, Modern Streamers for Trophy Trout. It was so successful that it's come out in a second version, the version 2 that I show here. He is known for big streamers, articulated streamers, and many have followed in his footsteps. His talks attract large crowds because he's a legend. And Kelly owns a fly shop and hotel just to the west of West Yellowstone, Montana, on the Madison River. It's called the Slide Inn. And so we're really thrilled that Kelly will be joining us. The May meeting will be jointly held with Leon Chandler TU and Mike and Josh, who are our speakers tonight. I'm a member of Leon Chandler TU. There's a lot of us that are on the call that belong to Leon Chandler TU. So we'll be co-hosting it. We'll be live streaming both on the Twin Tiers Five Rivers and Leon Chandler TU Facebook page, as well as welcoming folks to join us through Zoom. I would say that we see that our event is posted on Facebook and it's being passed around, and it has many views. So we're a little bit nervous about the turnout, but we expect a great turnout for May 3rd. Mark your calendars, don't miss it. Kelly Gallup, he will be one of the premier speakers we've ever hosted. Many thanks to the planning team, Don Austin, Eric Masterbirdie, and Bob Carlson for getting the arrangements and booking Kelly. We're just thrilled. So, Bob, I think I'm turning it over to you to introduce Mike and Josh.
All right. Thanks, Kirk. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Lenetsky and Josh Filter, our two speakers for tonight. Mike and Josh are two of the leaders of the Leon Chandler chapter of Trout Unlimited, as Kirk mentioned. And we've had them visit our group on many occasions to talk on various topics, including streamer fishing, fishing in Montana, fishing in Colorado, and so forth. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that their talks are always entertaining and informative. And tonight, Mike and Josh are going to be talking about various trib, stream, pond, and lake fly fishing opportunities in the Finger Lakes region. And I'll go into techniques they like, and I'm not sure what else, flies maybe, and so forth. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mike and Josh. You guys there?
Yeah, we're here. We're here.
Perfect.
So I'll start with hello. Thanks all for attending. I'd like to give a real quick thank you again to Eric for tying before the meeting. I will say that is a phenomenally wonderful fly. It is one of the flies that is in both Josh and my fly box, and we use it a lot in the spring. Also, shout out to Colin Nash Those bucktails that he sells are unbelievable, probably some of the best that I've tied with. He ties a lot of colors and a lot of custom colors, and you can find Colin on Facebook or on Instagram. Just look up Colin Nash, Nash is the last name. And with that, I think we can get started talking about the spring fly fishing opportunities up here in the Finger Lakes area. So, you know, for many people, and it's not necessarily me or Josh or one of them or any of them, but for many people, spring, particularly April 1st, marks the beginning of the fishing season. Some of us are a little bit crazier, and we fish all winter long. So we're just kind of already out there when the spring starts. But for many people, you know, the spring, when things start turning green, is when things start to sort of come to life, and the fish are around in a little bit bigger numbers and are often more willing to play than they are in the winter.
Sorry.
Oh no. So there are a lot of different fly fishing opportunities for all styles of fishing and skill levels in the spring. You know, depending on what you want to do, you can find a lot of fish, and you can find them in a lot of different ways, whether it's looking at small streams for chasing stockies or looking for native or naturalized fish, whether you're still in the lake looking for things that are closer to shore, like big lake trout and pike and bass that might be cruising the drop-off line. A lot of people around now are really interested in tributaries, looking for the pre and post spawn lake run fish, and the ponds are just starting to turn on around here too, and you can start looking for early season bass and a lot of panfish that are around in the ponds.
So this is just sort of a summary of the things we're going to talk about tonight. So locally, we're going to talk about tributaries to the lake, small lakes and ponds, some of our cold water freestone streams, as well as some of our Finger Lakes opportunities around here. So I think we're sort of going to go through this more or less in this order. We're going to talk about tributaries to the lakes first, because that's sort of what's on everybody's mind right now at this time of year. Generally, the 1st of April, we see all those crowds. We see trucks and cars from all over the place parked in all of our parking lots that were empty all winter long. And that's a sign that spring has surely arrived in the Finger Lakes. So some of these tributaries to our lakes, you know, most of them are the obvious ones. We're not going to blow up any spots here. Everybody knows these spots. There's other spots as well. So pull out a map and do a little digging. So a lot of this is sort of, we're not going to give away any honey holes, but we're going to talk about some of the popular streams that people don't have any surprises here. So tons of information is available online, as well as if you pick up a gazetteer, or if you look on Google Maps, you can go up and down shorelines and scour around for places where you might have access and find some of these tribs and trickles. If you want to make sure you're doing it legally, you might want to check out the DEC website as well. I think they've recently updated it, and it's a lot easier to find the information and access points than it ever was sort of before.
Sadly.
Yeah, whether that's a good or a bad thing, we won't totally express our opinions on it, but we're not big fans, so we will express our opinions on it. So some places to start. So tributaries to the lake include Fall Creek, so that's generally the stretch below Ithaca Falls out to the lake. Salmon Creek, that's anywhere from the falls up in Ludlowville down to the lake. Catherine Creek, I'm not really sure where the upstream barrier is on that, if there is one.
I think it's a lot like the Wasco and Cayuga.
And Owasco and Cayuga inlets that just keep going until they sort of peter out into little headwaters kind of streams. So all of these places, some of them offer extensive amounts of fishery, whereas others are very limited in their amount of fishery that we have before we hit the first barrier falls, like here in Fall Creek. So those are all good places to start looking for our spring fish. So in general, we sort of define the tributaries as the portions of the streams between the lake and the first impassable barrier. So I already mentioned what a couple of the barriers here are. Salmon Creek, we pictured Ludlowville's Falls there. So that's anywhere upstream from Salt Point and Myers Park all the way up to Ludlowville Falls. And there's various stretches in there that tend to hold fish a little more than others. You'll probably find them because there'll be 97 of your new best friends in each one of those holes right now that do tend to hold fish. So if you'd like to find out where the fish generally hold and learn something about reading water, now's a good time to just put on your waders, stomp through the stream. Might as well leave your fly rod in the truck maybe, because 97 guys will already be there. but at least it's a way to scope out some of the spots and what types of water are good places to hold fish, right? There's not gonna be a lot of guys in the areas where there's not a lot of fish. Other places like the Cayuga Inlet, for example. So that's anywhere above the Flathead Dam, and there's a fish ladder there. So anywhere upstream of there, there's miles of unimpeded stream that can be easily explored. There's a number of access points throughout the inlet, some legal, some a little less legal. But right now, anywhere you find cars with Patagonia stickers and rod racks on them are good places that you can probably legally access those places on the inlet. That's a place you got to do some stomping around. You got to do some stomping around, explore, find the areas where you find people, find the deeper holes, find wood in those streams, and you'll generally find fish.
So, you know, as I said, spring fishing season starts every year on April 1st. With the new regs, I'm not sure how much we'll really feel that or how much we won't. I think it'll be a symbolic April 1st if you really want to keep fish. But under the new New York State DEC regulations, we can fish for trout on inland trout streams, not on tributaries, all year long, with a catch and release season in the winter. But these crowds, you know, these crowds that Josh talked about, they're there for the first week or two of the season. And after that second week into that third week, the crowds really start to thin out. And the fish don't always thin out. So, you know, one thing you can do at this time of year is learn where there are access points, look at the water, and then when the people disappear, go back and check it out. And I can't guarantee you'll always find fish, but I can guarantee you'll find fish frequently enough that you might want to go back and just keep pushing your luck. But the crowds will thin out and there will be fewer people on the water. This one? Oh, all right. So did we skip one? No rainbows? Huh. Well, so yeah, oh well, maybe we get it.
There's a rainbow. There's more rainbows coming up.
So yeah, so the season will start kind of in the Finger Lakes with most people who are fishing the tributaries looking for the lake run rainbow trout. And you know, and it's no surprise we listed the streams that get the big pushes on Seneca and on Cayuga. On Seneca, it's Catherine Creek. It gets a big push of rainbow trout. On Cayuga Lake, it's really the inlet which gets a huge push of rainbow trout. If you're curious as to how many fish they've passed through the fish ladder, the DEC keeps numbers and they track them on a chalkboard down at the Flathead Dam, which is back behind the Home Depot. Okay. Oh, we're not talking about other streams like that, Shahab.
Shab's blowing up his own spots on
yeah,
the chat.
don't mention and yeah, so but those crowds will thin out from there. You know, and the early fish that we're looking for, the rainbows come in first. And they will in a few weeks be started to be replaced by landlocked salmon and brown trout that are not necessarily coming in to spawn like the rainbows do, but are coming in to eat some of the forage fish that are spawning. Once upon a time it was smelt. Now it tends to be sunfish and minnows and all sorts of other things that gobies that swim into the tributaries to spawn in the spring. These fish are some of my favorite fish to target in the tribs in the spring because, you know, they are unlike the rainbows that are in the spawn mode. These fish are aggressive and they chase streamers and they chase them with a lot of vigor and very aggressively, and they can be a blast to catch. I've had days where we've gone out and we've caught landlocks, browns, and rainbows in the same day. As the spring goes on, we'll start to see smallmouth bass coming in. We'll talk about those in a little bit later. But for the most part, with the exception, I believe, of these early season rainbows, most of the fish that we're looking at right now are really aggressive and are energetic and are really kind of harder than in many other times of year to kind of land. They're fired up. The Thunder Creek minnows, particularly in white and chartreuse, which is a color that I really like, just drives particularly the landlocks crazy in the early spring.
Yeah, on streams where there might still be some residual smelt runs as well, the lavender and white version that Eric showed as well is a great pattern to have. If you put a little bit of green in there too, maybe a little bit across its back, a little peacock curl even over the top to add a little extra decoration to that. Fantastic fly to imitate smelt. So although we don't have a lot of smelt in Cayuga Lake anymore, the past few years, we have been noticing a few. So I have noticed a few small schools of them here and there. Not enough. Don't go out and get your dip nets and stuff and start heading over here with your lanterns. There's not enough for that. But there are a few small schools of smelt around still. So I think that a smelt pattern is still a very effective pattern for targeting these fish. So like Michael said, the rainbows will be in there. They'll be spawning, doing their thing. The landlocks will come in, as well as the brown trout, in general, to eat their eggs. So egg patterns can be effective to target these fish if that's your thing. But we're really looking for the ones that come in chasing those forage fish. So those are the ones that are big, strong, aggressive fish that are looking to chow down on some of the bait fish that we have. So we'll diverge just a little bit here. We'll talk about tackle for a second. So what do we generally like to use to target these lake run fish? In general, you want a rod with enough backbone to land these large aggressive fish. Typically, we're also fishing larger flies. You know, we're throwing some streamers or at least a woolly bugger or something. So in general, we fish 6 or 7 weights, usually fairly fast action ones, typically 9 to 11 feet in length. Although I got to say all my rods right now are 9-footers. And primarily I'm fishing a 9-foot 6 weight or a 9-foot 7 weight for all of these fish. In terms of reels, you may want to have a reel with some drag abilities at least to assist in fighting these fish. Not always necessary, but a lot of time we catch them on a swing presentation. So we don't have a lot of line out there that we need to manage and we get them on the reel rather quickly. So having a drag or having a reel with a reliable drag is definitely a plus in these situations. You can go as fancy or as little as you want to sort of on the reels here. You don't really need anything super fancy. They're not going to smoke a lot of your line off, and you don't need like a big saltwater drag on them, but something that's reliable, something a little better than a click and pawl. We usually fish for these. As far as our other tackle, in general, we throw floating lines most of the year when we're fishing the tributaries. A couple of our favorites, Cortland Big Fly that I've shown here in either the 6 or the 7 weight. We also like some of their intermediate lines as well. They have a Cortland Compact Intermediate, which is sort of similar in nature to like a Rio Outbound. Well, I disappeared. There I am again. A Rio Outbound. So Rio Outbounds are also some of our favorite lines, either in the full floating versions or in the intermediate head versions. We like these intermediate lines sometimes when the flows are up, because I feel it gives us a little bit better presentation for our streamers. It just sort of gets them down below the surface. We can fish a lighter weighted streamer and we can get a nice presentation that way. When you have an intermediate line, it gets down below the top surface of the current, and it just drops down just a little bit where the water is just a little bit slower, and it slows your swinging presentation down. If you're doing a down and across style presentation, if you throw that on an intermediate tip, it tends to get you out of the top of the water column and get you down a little bit where you into those slower currents. So it slows down your swing just a little bit, just enough so that it's not really ripping over the fish's head. Sort of dangles there a little bit longer in their faces and gives us a little bit better presentation. So occasionally we'll use some of these intermediate lines as well.
You know, again, these fish tend to be, at least the ones that Josh and I like to chase a lot, tend to be a little bit more active and aggressive. You'll notice that most of the patterns we talk about are going to be streamers of some variant or another. We've got a Garchside soft tackle, one of the Scott Sanchez patterns, a double bunny. You know, the Crelax, which is a Chuck Craft pattern. Actually, we've been fishing that Crelax this spring, chasing holdover trout and in some local streams, and Josh has had a phenomenal amount of success with the Crelax. And while I can't claim to have the same amount of success, I've had some near happiness with the Crelax. It's been a pretty good pattern. Essentially, it's a Clouser minnow tied with a flash product that's got gold and copper and silver strands in it.
You're going to see this slide in pretty much every level of this talk on tributaries, freestones, ponds, lakes, every place. We're a big fan of this fly. It produces a lot. Michael can take a little more credit for the trout that I've caught lately on the Creelex because I ran out. I haven't had much time to tie this semester due to work restrictions. Luckily, Michael had extra Creelexes in his box and was nice enough to lend them to me. So I've taken advantage of the Creelex flies that he's tied. So he gets the assist at least on some of those fish. So
basically, I mean, a lot of fish and many people who are observing this talk do love eggs and nymphs and fishing for them to the spawning and the post-spawn rainbows. I'm not gonna lie, I don't do a lot of it, and sadly neither does Josh. But it is a way to fish for them, and it's very effective. Oh, we've got patterns too of things that I don't use a lot of.
these are things we hear are good though.
I mean, the woolly bugger I know is good. And I've got friends who will swear by the prints and a hare's ear and some kind of eggy things and some sort of jiggy thing. I don't know what that jiggy nymph is.
I just found these images on the internet. Those aren't actually from our fly boxes.
So we want to pretend that we care about all kinds of fly fishing, but we don't really do a lot of egg and nymph fishing, much to the distinct amusement of Eric and Don, who I believe are both on the talk and give us a lot of shit for it. But I like swinging streamers.
That's generally what we fish. We do carry these. If nothing else is happening, we'll try to put these on and fish them for a good 10 to 15 minutes before we give up and go back to what we do best.
But as an example, I have 4 boxes of woolly buggers and 1 very small box of eggs and nymphs.
That's probably about the same for me as well.
Yeah. You can catch all kinds of things in the spring when we talk about the rainbows and the landlocks and the browns being kind of common. But some springs you will see in certain conditions, and I don't really know what they are. They seem to be like shortly after high water. You'll find lakers that run into the streams.
Yeah, so it seems like typically after we get like a nice warm rain that really brings those creek levels up, a couple of things will happen. We see an influx of a lot of different fish. It encourages those bait fish to come in and to start to spawn. So after a nice warm rain is the best time this spring that we're going to be targeting landlocks particularly, as well as the browns that come in chasing those forage fish. Typically it's after a nice warm rain that boosts the creek levels up to an unfishable level. And then as they drop and recede, we go out there and we see what we can find. So we'll find lakers occasionally that come up into all the way up to the falls, all the way up to barrier falls in all of our streams, particularly after a nice warm rain in the spring. They don't stick around super long. As soon as those waters start to recede and drop back to fishable levels, they're on their way heading back to the lake. These guys like to be in 50 or so feet of water at least this time of year, if not deeper. But they will come up after triggered by those rains, following in the forage fish. So this is something that's not that uncommon for us to find in our tribs in the spring, in addition to the other fish. So we're going to refer to this as the good. This is good and bad, I guess, right? It's a nice landlocked salmon. The bad is that big old lamprey on its side, which we haven't noticed as much the past few years here. But a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, it seemed like pretty much every fish we were catching in the spring had at least one lamprey on it, if not more. And if it didn't have a lamprey on it, it definitely had a fresh lamprey scar. I mean, I think this was a particularly good spring, despite the lamprey problem. And I think out of the dozens of landlocks that I probably landed that spring, maybe 1 fish was clean and unmarked from any sort of lamprey. We seem to have that a little more under control, and they seem to go in cycles. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, they poison. I mean, the DEC controls lampreys in the Finger Lakes by adding by using a lampricide. I think they tend to put it in every 8 to 10 years. So for 4 or 5 years following the lampricide of one of our major streams, and they generally only put them in, they only generally treat the inlet, at least on Cayuga Lake. I think on Seneca Lake, they treat Catherine Creek, and you'll get 3 or 4 years of, of very low levels, and then they'll start growing back up again to the point where enough people notice them that they decide to start writing to the DEC, and the DEC does another lampricide. They also, in the inlet, because the fish are passed through a dam, through a fish ladder, They also do trap lamprey as they attempt to pass upstream, and they kill the lamprey directly from the fish ladder, from holding pens that they've got in there that the lamprey drop into, and then they pull them out and turn them into fish chow. And this is one of the things we call the ugly in the Finger Lakes is the suckers. When the rainbows are sort of done spawning, the suckers start to move in force. You know, I mean, I would say they're not as bad as you might think, just because they will take a fly. And after the winter, at least if you've been fishing like Josh or I have, you've spent a lot of time on the water and not a lot of time with fish on the end of your line. And even a 5-pound sucker, while it's not the best fight in the world, at least on the first day that you've been out and catching fish, it's a fish, and it'll make you smile a little bit.
Yeah, so typically this is a bad sign for us. Once the suckers are in really thick, that's typically a sign that most of the rainbows have already gone bye-bye and headed back to the lake. The suckers will come in once the water's warmed up a little bit, and typically those rainbows will have moved out and are already post-spawn and back into the lake. However, these guys lay lots of eggs, right? Sucker spawn pattern is a thing for a reason. I believe it works. I hear it works. So if you successfully target areas behind these pods of suckers, there are oftentimes pods of browns hanging out there. A lot of times they're little guys, but they are very aggressive and will actively take spawn patterns. And they're in there just chowing on the eggs behind these guys. So it gives you an opportunity to target some of the smaller lake run browns, oftentimes right behind these guys.
And last but not least, you can occasionally catch something very strange in some of our tributaries, including the very, very, very rare and occasional brook trout. I know where this one was caught, and I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing it came from miles and miles upstream and fell over a lot of waterfalls and got confused along the way, and then got even stupider to get caught. But you can sometimes catch something that you really don't expect at all. I cannot say this has happened a lot. I think I've known of 2 or 3 that might have been caught over the past 20 some years, but it does happen. And it's really cool when you land it and you realize that you caught a complete unicorn in the stream.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more now about, I'm not sure what we're talking about.
I think we're just showing pictures of fish.
Yeah,
So-
we're going to show you some more of our fish. We'll talk a little bit about tactics here. So we mentioned that we throw streamers mostly. So typically when we fish our streamers, we're fishing, we start usually with a down and across presentation, usually on a floating line, about a 9-foot leader or so. We cast the far bank, sort of on a tight line swing, let it swing down and across. One of the most important things you can do when you're doing that down and across presentation is to allow the fly to dangle at the end of your downstream swing. I can't tell you how many times the fish will track that fly, hang out just behind it, and then when you lift your rod tip to pick it up to cast, it looks like that fly is then fleeing from the fish. So that fleeing motion of the fly will often stimulate their predatory instincts, if not their hunger instincts, at least the predatory reaction to pounce on something that's trying to flee from them. So it's very important to let your fly dangle down there and then slowly raise your rod tip. And as you're raising your rod tip, be ready for something to grab it and be ready to set. So you want all your slack gathered up. You want to have a tight hand on your line and be ready to set as you dangle that fly down there. Oftentimes we'll let it dangle sort of down there. We may give it a couple of short strips upstream, then slowly lift our rod tip to make it exaggerate that fleeing motion. That tends to trigger a lot of fish to change the direction of the fly and make it suddenly dart away from them. Like suddenly they notice the predators behind them and they want to get away from it. The other way we typically present these flies is we'll try to toss them upstream into a pool and sort of let them dead drift down like a stunned bait fish, falling, sort of tumbling helplessly head on towards the fish. That's usually a tactic that we go to after the down and across sort of presentation doesn't work. It's also a good presentation to work through deep pools with because it allows your fly to get deeper there on that upstream presentation, and you can let it slowly drift back towards you, gathering up the slack as you go. Those are the 2 prime ways that we fish streamers. Occasionally, we'll do a little more movement to our streamers as well. So we'll incorporate some sort of jigging motion or also just short strips. So we'll combine that down and across sort of swing that I talked about with a series of short strips and pauses. So if the passive down and across isn't working, we typically try to mix up our retrieves a little bit. Change the speed, change the stripping frequency, change the pulse, change the jigging action, something until we figure out sort of what those fish are keying in on that particular day. It's not usually the same thing. So you usually have to experiment a little bit with your retrieve before you really get it dialed in. Oops.
Oh, which flies going?
Oops. I think we're going the wrong way.
Yeah, we definitely are going the wrong way. There we go.
Let's go this way instead.
All right. So as the spring moves on, generally in kind of that early part of May, so towards the late spring, the water starts to get warmer. It breaks that kind of 55-degree mark. You'll start to see smallmouth bass and carp show up. They show up initially just gorging on everything that's in the streams, but they're really there to spawn. And both the smallmouth bass and the carp will spawn in mid-May to early June period. They are super aggressive, except for when they're on their beds, but that couple weeks before and that couple weeks after they're actually spawning, they're super aggressive. They're in our tribs and they love to smack things. Again, it's going to be almost, the gear that we use is pretty much like we use for the early season fish. We're using 5, 6, and 7 weights. I really do recommend a 6 or 7 weight and not the 5 weight. The carp in our lakes are huge, and the carp that will eat your flies in some of our tributaries, it's going to be not impossible, but very, very difficult to land some of these on a 5 weight. We're using for the most part the same flies that we're using for those early season fish. We're using clousers, we're using woolly buggers, we're using the Krelex. They tend to be more natural colors. They tend to be fish, they tend to be flies that are on the bottom. Again, nymphs work really well on this in this kind of fishing as well, particularly for the carp. The carp, when they're feeding, can be very, very selective, and small patterns that hang on the bottom are not too small for some of the giant carp that we have floating around. Again, you'll see the same picture. So we've got a woolly bugger, we've got a Krelex, we've got a clouser minnow, we've got a Moto's minnow, and we've got a complex twist bugger. Again, they're all pretty heavy flies. They're all going to be on the bottom or darn close to it.
So the other thing, so these bass, when they are aggressive and they are feeding, you basically cannot throw a fly to them that is too big for them to eat. They want to chase other things down. They want to herd them. They want to eat them. So shown here is a 7-inch or so fly that I tied, articulated, lead, big, heavy fly, almost impossible to cast on a 6 weight, which is what I'm throwing in this picture. But I managed to chuck it upstream into a pool and let it dead drift back through that pool like a stunned bait fish. And I was kind of stunned that a giant bass decided to absolutely annihilate this thing. And it worked not just once, but it worked several times, actually, all in the same day, within the same 50 feet or so of stream. There were several bass that were willing to take a swat at this monstrosity of a fly. I don't actually even have this fly anymore, and I don't tend to throw flies this big. But if you have big flies in your boxes, don't be afraid to throw them at these early season bass. They're super aggressive in the pre-spawn mode. They're super hungry. They're willing to either take a bite out of everything or totally destroy it. So in general around here, we tend to fish flies that are quite a bit smaller than a lot of our guys in the Midwest tend to fish. So guys like Schultz and Willen and those guys that fish a lot of smallmouths before they're on to other things. Well, Schultz pretty much specializes in smallmouth. Most of their flies are easily in the 4 to 6 inch range. So that's the majority of the flies that they're throwing out there. So you really can't have a fly that's too big for the bass to eat. They will try to take a shot at pretty much anything. So here, our targets. Techniques are more or less the same way we fish for our other fish. We generally start fishing streamers, cast across, and let the fly swing downstream. The difference here is that oftentimes here we want to be bouncing it down along the bottom. So if we don't feel the occasional tick on a rock or something, we know we're not down deep enough. So we'll often go to a couple of different things here. We'll either switch out to a heavier fly. So typically for us, that means one with heavier lead eyes on it. So we usually don't fish dumbbells. We usually start with like small size lead eyes on them and go up from there to mediums or larges. Same fly, just tied with different weights of dumbbell eyes on them. Additionally, we'll add split shot, generally 8 to 12 inches above our fly. We'll pinch a split shot or two onto our rig. Makes it a little harder to cast, but it is getting down there. So oftentimes you might feel something that you think is a snag. A lot of times that snag is going to start moving upstream on you. Snags generally don't move upstream in my experience. Most things tend to go the other way. So if you feel something big, set the hook on it. If you set the hook into a log, no big deal. The worst thing you're going to do is lose a fly. So if you feel your fly stop, we're generally setting the hook. So we get some monstrous bass, and the picture on the left is Michael with a fish that he caught a year or two ago that I netted, and I thought it was a small grouper. It was just ridiculously big. I'd never seen a thing with proportions like that. I mean, it literally looks like he's holding a football there. So we get some really nice, really big bass in our trip.
Hey, Josh, I had one question. When you're talking about lead eyes, do you add any more lead to the flies or just the lead eyes, and is it always lead eyes?
Typically, for most of my flies, it's lead eyes. We'll show you some examples in a minute here. So like on the Crelex, for example, even my woolly buggers I tie with lead eyes. I have an example of one of those later on. I call it it's a lead-eyed bugger tied with some polar chenille instead of other chenille. It's a fly that we fish a lot.
But no additional wraps of lead?
Typically on those, no.
No.
If I'm using a cone-headed fly, which I don't use that often, but like a cone-headed woolly bugger or something, I'll tuck some extra lead in there. But I usually don't do it on my flies that have lead eyes. Usually if it's lead eyes, I just want the lead eyes because it gives it a little bit different action. That lead sort of towards the front. And so typically those are things that I think are sort of imitating like crayfish maybe, or something that sort of has a head down sort of orientation. So we typically don't add extra lead to the bodies. We sort of want them to ride that way. So,
Cool, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so these fish come up all the same tributaries that all of our other lake run fish come up. You can find them in all the same locations. Typically, they like to hang out in places where they can ambush things. So good places in the river to look for these fish are ledges, drop-offs, behind rocks, somewhere where they can be relatively hidden, but have easy access to ambush things. So put yourself into predator mode and think about where you would hang out if you wanted to see an easy meal just sort of drop into your lap that you could spring out of your hiding spot, snatch that Big Mac, and then go back to your hiding spot really quickly. So ledges, drop-offs, boulders, deeper pools, specifically the front edges of pools as well as the back edges of pools. Places that provide a little cover where they can dart up and ambush things quickly. Those are the types of water you typically want to look for these fish. You'll also find them exposed and on beds in the streams. We typically leave those guys alone or try to.
Yeah, if you see a smallmouth on a bed, it's protecting its eggs and its young, and you should probably just leave it alone and not target it. I don't think it's necessarily fair. And for every one fish you see like that, there's going to be 10 more that are waiting to ambush something, and will be just happy to play with you.
Yeah, we typically don't find high success in those things that are on beds. I know a lot of bait and tournament fishermen sort of target these. A friend of mine went out with a guide a few years ago and they targeted specifically fish on beds using gear. and they would just drop something down onto the bed and let it hang there until the fish came over, sort of to move it off of the bed, not really to eat it, but sort of to move it off the bed with its mouth. And then they'd hook them. And while he said he caught a lot of fish, he came back not really enjoying the experience all that much.
More bass, kind of reflective of what we're generally catching here in the spring. And we catch them in all kinds of water. Occasionally you will tie into carp. Carp are huge when they're feeding. You can follow their mud trail and you can specifically target them. This fish is one of the reasons why I say a 5-weight is not necessarily the smartest rod to carry.
That was landed on a 5-weight. When I caught that fish, I only had 2 rods to my name. I had a 5-weight and an 8-weight. I was down there fishing for bass this particular night where I was getting away with using the 5-weight. I hooked into something huge. I didn't know that it was going to be a big carp at the time. I proceeded to fight it for a while. And as my stage 5-weight was flexing deep into the butt right above the cork, I was deathly afraid that I was going to be saying goodbye to my trout rod at the height of trout season and sending it off to Washington for a repair. At the time, I didn't have the money to replace it, or probably even enough to send it back to Sage without borrowing some money. So I was deathly afraid that I was going to lose my trout rod for the season. I'd be forced to fish with an 8-weight for the rest of the year until I could get it fixed. But this was on a 5-weight. I managed to land it after a lengthy battle. These things, though, when you hook a carp, this one was caught in Fall Creek. The bridge is right behind me, so I'm not giving away any secrets. Carp will come up into Fall Creek. They will mud, they will tail. You can target them. When you hook one, they decide they don't want to be in Fall Creek anymore. They'd rather take the 1.5 mile run or so back to Cayuga Lake. And it's your job to stop them. A rod of sufficient weight, 6-weight minimum, 7 probably better.
8-weight, 8-weight a little smarter.
8-weight, not ridiculous. You can put the brakes on them. This is the one fish in the Finger Lakes where I can guarantee pretty much you're going to see your backing. So if you're going to go out to target carp, the other thing I always worry about is as I see my backing coming off my reel and going out through the tip of my rod, I question who tied that knot between my backing and my fly line. Did I do it? Did the fly shop do it? Did I do a good job? Usually it's me that's done it. So I'm hoping that I tied a really good knot there. So you're going to want to check whether you do an Albright or a loop to loop, which I don't like at all. I typically do an Albright or else a nail knot to connect my backing to my fly line. I would double check that before you go carp fishing and make sure you think it's secure. If you happen to lose the fish, you're not only going to lose the fish because your backing knot fails, you're also going to see your $90 fly line go downstream along with the fish as you've parted ways from your backing. That's not going to make you happy. You might go home and get your kayak and go out to the lake to try to find 90 feet of floating fly line and see if that fish is still attached. I would probably be inclined to do just that. So check your backing to fly line knot before you go out to target carp. Even if you're targeting bass, check that fly line to backing knot because you might accidentally hook one of these guys.
I mean, I've caught far more carp accidentally while I am targeting bass than I've actually caught carp when I'm out trying to catch carp.
That's probably true for most of us.
And they will. I mean, this is the only fish that I can say will regularly take you into your backing, and this is where, you know, Josh says you don't need a lot of for most of our fish. You really don't need a reel that's got a really great drag. But for carp, having a decent drag is a helpful thing on your reel because you could use it. These are big, powerful fish that are they're hard to stop with a 7-weight or an 8-weight as well, especially a fish of that size. And there are plenty of them.
It's a lot like hooking a pit bull, I would say, with your fly rod, trying to land it.
Another question on that, carp. As
Yeah,
do you
sure.
remember what you caught that on? Is that a woolly bugger in its mouth?
No, that fly that's in its mouth is actually it's a leech pattern. It's a claret leech. Ask Mike Hogue for more details. He'll sell you all the materials too. It's basically claret marabou, some claret mohair, some claret hackle. I thought there was no way that thing was going to work, but I caught a lot of bass and a lot of carp on a claret leech.
Cool. Thanks.
You know, one of the other joyous byproduct fish we have here is a fish called a rudd. This is an invasive species. It came in, they believe in ballast water. It's a fish from the Baltic Sea. And they grow pretty big, like on the big side, they can be 20, 21 inches long. Most of them are that we catch here 14 to 16. They are bright orange. For me, they're the dirt. That's when I know bass season is over, when the rudds are in thick. You could say goodbye to the bass. They are phenomenally disappointing because for big fish, they fight for about a half a second and then they just swim in.
Yeah, they're big and heavy. You kind of pull them in on their side like they're a big dinner plate or something.
Yeah, but they're not fighters.
They're interesting. They're curiosity. If you haven't caught many of them, they're fun. I would say they're fun because they take flies pretty aggressively. And you can often sight fish to these guys. I mean, a bright orange fish in Fall Creek is pretty darn easy to see. So you can see them moving around. You have an easy target to cast to. If you swing a fly in front of them or put a good drift over them, they will actively take a small woolly bugger. They'll actively take small soft hackle flies as well. So they're fun to sight fish if there's not a whole lot else going on. They don't fight particularly well, but they're kind of a curiosity.
So we've got a lot of smaller freestone streams. I think in the new DEC regulations, we would call them inland trout streams. There are a lot of them in the Finger Lakes, from some that we've mentioned to some that we won't mention, but I'll say like Salmon Creek above Ludlowville Falls, or Fall Creek above Ithaca Falls, plus a whole lot of other ones. I don't know if we named any, what other ones we might have named, but you know, they're very easy to find now, thanks to the DEC, who now publishes an interactive online map. And if you want to find a trout stream near you, whether it's stocked or not stocked, the DEC will help you find it. This is one of our regional streams. This is the same brown trout that Josh and I caught 3 days apart in March of, I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years ago at this point in time. Josh was out on maybe a Wednesday evening, and right around dusk or so, a little bit before, he was drifting a size 14 or 16 black caddis, and he caught this fish. 3 days later, I was out with my friend Ken on the same stream in the same stretch, and I did not know about Josh's fish from a couple days before, but I was also fishing a size 14 black caddis, and I caught this fish. We have some different pictures, and we compared spot patterns on their cheeks, and we decided that not only were they the same size fish caught in the same place on the same fly, they were in fact the same fish. This is, I mean, it could be a wild fish, but in all likelihood, it's a 2 or 3 year holdover from a stocking. A lot of our freestone streams historically have been heavily stocked. Now the DEC has restructured how they stock streams. Many streams that had been stocked before will no longer be stocked for a variety of reasons, whether they want them to be wild completely, whether they have decided that the value of stocking those streams is outweighed by leaving the streams alone, because the fish that they do stock will die within a couple of weeks of them stocking them, whether they're pulled out or whether the water temperature gets too high. Some other streams are going to be stocked crazy amounts. Some of the streams in this region will be stocked 4 or 5 times between March and May of the year. Ideally, as they go on with future stockings, the first couple of stockings on any of our stock streams are pretty much, bucket brigaded, wall-to-wall fishermen. But I hope by the time they put in fish for the 3rd or 4th time, or even 5th time on a couple of our streams, for the most part, the fishermen are gone, and those fish manage to, make it through the summer and be there for us to play with in the fall and in the winter. Again, a lot of these streams drain into the Finger Lakes eventually. And as I said, not only will there be stockies, there will be often holdovers, wilds, native fish in there as well. I think that for the most part, you want to fish with anything that you really feel comfortable landing some trout that might range from 8 to 20 inches. We use a lot of 3 to 5 weights, 8.5 to 9 feet in length. I think my overall favorite rod of late, or actually probably of the past few years, is an 8'8" Douglas Upstream 4-weight. I find that it's an ideal rod. It's got enough backbone to land the larger fish, and I can throw woolly buggers as easily as I can throw soft tackles and dry flies. Again, you can use anything you would like, really, any flies that you'd like to target and land these fish. I really like, as the spring moves on, in the next couple of weeks, we'll start seeing March Browns and then Hendricksons, more and more Cahills. Right now, the stoneflies are out in force, but in reality, I haven't seen very many trout looking up at them. The water is still pretty darn cold in the streams I was at on this weekend, and the fish were really oriented on the bottom and not looking at all the stoneflies up top. But eventually, they will start. And that's a really wonderful time to throw, for me at least, some of the larger dry flies that you'll throw in the year, which is, size 12 and 10 Hendricksons and March Browns. And, as the season goes on, with a couple of minor exceptions like early Cahills and the Hendricksons and the Isonychias in the summer, most of my dries will then drop down into the 18 to 20 inch range.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I have a confession that I'm going to make here. This fish that I caught, if you look closely at it, the fly that's in his mouth is not a streamer. I'm embarrassed to say it's a mop fly. Shout out to Don Austin for the mop fly. So this is the only fish I've ever caught on a mop fly, though. Most of the fish I like to catch, I typically love to fish soft hackle flies. Why do I love to fish soft hackle flies? We've heard a lot about soft hackles lately. Matt Collins gave a great talk on them not too long ago. Joe Cambridge gave a class on them. So soft hackles are awesome flies. I think the reason why I like them, I think the reason why Michael likes them as well, is because we fish them like little streamers. It's a passive way of fishing. We typically toss them and let our thing go down and across, and you get this great grab at the end of your swing as it comes towards the surface. So these flies sort of sink through the water column. They swing down and across. We let our line get a little bit of a belly in it. And as that gets downstream from us, it has the effect of pulling this fly up towards the surface. It again looks like an emerging insect, or an insect that's trying to get away from predatory fish. And on that downstream sort of hang, and at the end of your swing, you want to hold on tight, because that's when you're going to get the grab, is when this thing starts to rise up in the water column. Additionally, we usually put a little bit of action into these. When we get to the end of our stream, to the end of our swing, we'll lift our rod tips gently, sort of mimicking the lysing ring rod. Lysing ring, I can't say.
The lysing ring lift.
What Michael just said, that tongue twister thing. So we sort of mimic that, but what that really does is it pulls your fly up to the surface and it makes it look like an emerging insect. So these are super effective flies, super fun to fish. You can tie them in all kinds of different color combinations. So here we have some that are just sort of imitative. We've got a Tups Indispensable there. We've got a variation from out in Yellowstone called the Shaky Beely that we've found to be super effective. It is sort of has a brownish antron tail that sort of imitates some sort of shuck. It's got sort of a brownish yellow body that can imitate a wide variety of our mayflies around here. And then we tie it with some yellow thread and a little bit of orange on the thorax. So this works great for March Browns, Hendricksons. I mean, pretty much works all season long and into the fall. You can even substitute for an ISO. So if you had one pattern, the Shaky Beely is a great looking pattern. There's an excellent tying demo video on this on the Blue Ribbons fly site, Blue Ribbon Flies from West Yellowstone, Montana. Has some excellent fly tying videos. You can see the directions and stuff for tying the Shaky Beely on there. Excellent year-round soft tackle. So soft tackles. So Michael mentioned the fish that we were catching. We had caught that same fish on a elk hair caddis, but it was a black elk hair caddis. So the black elk hair caddis really mimicked probably one of the small stones that we're seeing all over the place right now. I believe that's what they're eating. When we caught that fish, it was both in March. So mine was, it was probably around mid-March. So the only things that were really coming off are black stones. You can also tie a super effective black soft tackle. So a couple of weeks ago, I was out. I saw a couple of rising fish. They weren't taking dries, but they seemed to be taking something just below the surface. I tied on a pair of soft tackles. One was sort of one that we called the richest soft tackle of RSH, which has sort of a pearl flash for a body. The second one that was trailing behind it was black with a black hackle. So it looked like those little stones. And every single fish that I caught that day, I caught about 24 fish, and every single fish took the dropper. It took the black stone looking soft tackle. So soft tackles are great to imitate tons of different hatches. They can represent a spinner, pretty much any stage of the life cycle. So I think that's why they're super effective.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, and it's not a local river, but at least regional on the Delaware, we will fish nothing but a pair of soft tackles all day long. Earlier in the day, letting them get wet and drop a little bit below the surface. Fish will take them as emergers or as nymphs that are being pushed around through the water. And later in the day, I'll grease them up as well as the tippet that they're tied onto, and I'll fish them as cripples and sort of dries neutrally in foam lines. And again, I find fish will take soft tackles that are floated on top a lot easier than, with a lot less discerning looks than the many of the dry flies that I've tried to convince large browns on the Delaware to eat.
Yeah, so when we're fishing in the spring, we're really waiting for those days where we can start to fish our soft tackles. We can fish dry flies for the first time. If none of that's going on, we'll of course throw the ubiquitous woolly bugger. A couple of things in the chat. Shaky Beely, yes, I said Shaky Beely. Blue ribbon flies. Do we Euro nymph? We do not Euro nymph. That's all I'll say.
Yeah,
we're not fans of the Euro.
We're not nympher. We do not nymph fish. We have friends who are really great at it and love it. And I don't think that will ever be. I had a nymphing rod once, and I traded it to Eric, and I ended up with a swinging switch rod, which I really love. But no, we don't nymph at all.
A very famous individual from the fly fishing industry who's owned several different rod companies referred to Euro nymphing as stationary trolling. And I believe that was one of the funniest things I ever heard.
Yeah, we both laughed pretty hard.
And a very apt description of our feelings on Euro nymphing. So I see Kirk smiling. At least he laughed at that.
So spring, particularly with stockies, you can find the trout when they're active. They can easily be caught. This is my son when he's maybe 7 or 8 years old. I think that's one of the first trout he caught by himself on a fly rod. That's actually after a stream cleanup from the FFI did on one of our creeks several years ago. It's one of those things, fishing with your kids, you don't know whether it's going to work or not work. There's particularly in the teenage years, your children go through a period, at least mine did, where they weren't as interested in hanging out with parents as they were when they were 5 or 6 or 7 years old. However, last summer, Josh and I were out fishing a bass pond, and my son, who is now 19, was fishing the bass pond with a couple of his friends, and they were fishing with fly rods and throwing clousers. It was interesting. It was nice. It was nice to see that something of fly fishing stuck with him, and he's still doing it. So it's a good time to take out kids. You can focus your efforts on a place that's been stocked recently. You can find fish that after a couple days of being in the water are hungry and aggressive. Everything you need to catch fish with to take a child fishing and have them like it more than not like it. Recognize many lessons that I've learned is one is that don't think that you're fishing for yourself, and don't really think that you're fishing. Recognize that you're taking a child out to fish, and their interest might last an hour. It might last 10 minutes. But in that 10 minutes or in that hour, you better make sure there's fish around and they can play with them. They like the action. But they also like the birds on the side of the stream. And we went chasing snakes and frogs that day, and all those other things that keep young boys and girls interested and active when you're out there. But there can be payoffs, and the kids will eventually come back to it if they really liked it. We just got a bunch of pictures now.
Yeah, I think we've got some shots of some springtime fish that aren't necessarily all the fresh stockies straight out of the bucket. So some of these are good opportunities for us to find some holdover fish as well. If you move around from, particularly this year, if you move around from the bridges and the main intersections of roads, places that are easily accessed by the DEC are the places that are getting stocked this year. They're not having any helpers or any assistance from the public like they do in typical years. So most bridge intersections and major roads that cross bridges or cross streams rather are going to be the sites of concentrated stocking populations this year. If you walk away from those a little bit, you're likely to find some fish that are not necessarily wild, at least holdovers in these streams, that sort of distance themselves from those centers of activity at this time of year. So while you can find the easy opportunities, you can also do a little exploring and target some higher quality fish, if you will.
So one thing you might notice, particularly in a lot of these pictures, is Josh and I do fish at night. While we don't Euro nymph, we are in another kind of strange little subset of fly fishers that like to fish at night. A lot of times, particularly as the spring moves on, we won't even go out until 7 o'clock at night to start fishing. And again, trying to throw dries and soft tackles and the occasional woolly bugger. But night fishing is fun. It's a lot more complicated than fishing in the day. You generally can't see what you're fishing to, and you don't know where the trees are around you, and you can't see holes. So you ought to know the streams that you're fishing pretty well, and have a fairly good sense of what your fly rod does and where your fly and how your flies behave.
Yeah, I would not recommend doing it alone, and I would not recommend doing it on a stream that you don't know very well. The streams that we fish at night, we generally know every rock, stick, log, tripping hazard, etc. before we get in that water at night. We could navigate those things confidently and safely during the darkness.
So in this area, kind of last but not least, are the small lakes and the ponds that are around here. There are a lot of warm water fishing opportunities that start popping up as the days warm up, as the sun comes out a little bit more. Some of our smaller ponds will start to thaw, and the ice will come off them, and you will start to see smallmouth, largemouths, and the sunfish. Again, these are great things for kids.
Yeah, I just saw it pop up in the chat. These are excellent recommendations for you to take your kids where there are lots of fish available.
Casterline Pond is a pond over in Homer. It is stocked with rainbow trout and brown trout, and it also runs into it's also fed by and outlets into the west branch of the Tyaphnioga. So occasionally you can find some pretty big fish in that pond. But it's a great pond. It's got a lot of shore access. If you want to take a kid out and catch a mess of trout, it's a pretty easy one to do it. Jennings Pond over in Danby is also a pretty good pond. I like to fish that a little earlier in the season before the weeds really come out and make fishing difficult. Obviously, if you have any access to farm ponds, most farm ponds have at least sunfish in them. And they're fun fish to catch.
So generally in these ponds, we'll sort of break it down a little bit more for you, but some of these we can find trout in. So typically in some of these ponds and small lakes. So Casterline is one that gets trout stocked in it. Additionally, what else do we have on that slide? The ponds in the Finger Lakes National Forest get a heavy stocking of brook trout and rainbow trout. Typically, there is a kids fishing derby in the spring that are held on those ponds. They're stocked generally a day or two before, full of hungry brook trout and rainbow trout. Occasionally for this tournament, they drop a couple of super sized tanker broodstock rainbows in there to give a kid or two the thrill of a lifetime. So this year,
the kids fishing derby in the ponds is May 1st.
so those ponds will be stocked slightly before that. They do ask out of courtesy that you don't fish them before the kids get a chance to at the fishing derby. So typically the fishing derby is on a Saturday. They usually stock on a Thursday or Friday beforehand. Then after that, the general public is welcome to go out there and fish in those ponds as not part of the fishing derby. Again, good place to take kids. There are typically quite a few fish around. They can be caught on either flies or traditional gear, a worm under a bobber. Still a great way to get a kid out there and interested in fishing by having some quick, fast and furious action.
You know, and if you don't have the gear to take a kid out fishing, whether it's fly or a spinning rod, the derby, and I forget which group runs it, in the county over there. But they usually publish it in the papers, but they have all of the gear a kid needs to throw a worm underneath a bobber, and then go catch the brook trout. If you really just want to get out there, it's a wonderful little ponds. The ponds are all pretty easy to access, and it can be a good afternoon to be out there on the water. And certainly in a couple of those ponds, you really are encouraged to keep the fish. Particularly one of them, which is Potomac Pond out there. Potomac Pond is really shallow, and it gets really, really warm really early in the season. So any trout that live in that stream, in that pond beyond like June 1st are just going to be, I guess, kind of a giant soup. They're not going to make it very long. Although last year when Josh and I were fishing, we fished in a blizzard in mid-May on the pond. The brookies were biting, so we didn't leave, but we did complain a lot that we were not dressed for a blizzard.
Yeah, I don't even think I had a jacket in the car that day.
So rods, in general, again, if you're somewhere where there are largemouth bass, we're looking at 5 to 7 weights. Again, we pretty much fish 9-foot rods. I've got a friend who really loves 8.5-foot rods. And I know people like 9.5 and 10, but we're generally fishing 9 foot. We're almost always using floating lines on these. I love largemouth because they will really readily, particularly later in the spring, rise to large poppers. And so will the sunfish as the water gets warmer. And that can also be a lot of fun. For some reason around here, both Josh and I found that blue in a popper is a really effective color. Don't know why. I guess it's like everything is a damselfly, and damselflies are, I guess, like Snickers bars of the insect world. These are some patterns that we like. I really do like fishing on top for the bass. Probably I grew up fishing for largemouths on top, so it's not surprising that I still like fishing for largemouths on top.
Yeah, so we like to use these blue flies. We either tie some version, sort of like the one on the bottom there, some rubber legs, some foam, fold it over sort of, and wrap the body with a little bit of chenille. They don't have to be anything too fancy to get their attention. You can also buy a lot of these poppers commercially available. The blue ones are super great. The ones that I really like are called boogle bugs. Lots of different fly fishing outfitters sell them. Schultz just got in a big shipment of them, so if you call him up, he'll throw a bunch of them in the mail to you. One of the problems with them is they're super expensive. They're like $8 a piece, sort of. They're super durable though. They have the cork and they have a lot of coating on them, so you can bounce them off of rocks and stuff, and they hold up pretty well. They come in other colors as well as blue, but if you're going to buy one color, buy blue. If you're gonna buy a second color, buy a second blue one. Other good bets for the ponds. Sunfish like to take nymphs. Squirmy wormies are deadly effective against most pond species, as are small woolly buggers. Yeah, click it. So I think this is a repeat. I'm not sure why this is in there again. Yeah, so we like to fish for sunnies. We're not above going out and throwing some poppers or little woolly buggers for sunnies. If you catch a big sunny, like one that's bigger than the size of your palm of your hand, That's our friend Mike Kirby's hands. He's a big dude and he's got big paws. So that's like almost the size of like a dinner plate right there, probably. Just super huge sunny. So these aren't quite as common, but you will find some farm ponds and things that are loaded with these. Even if you catch the small ones, they're a wide, flat fish, and they put a pretty significant bend in a lot of your rods. This is a great place to go throw your eagle claw feather lights and stuff like that, your fiberglass rods. Super fun. It's a blast to go catch a mess of panfish. You can catch sunnies, perch, crappies, a whole mixed bag of stuff when you go to some of these ponds. Super good option when the water starts warming up. Of course, there's bass in these ponds. Some of them have giant hog-sized channel cats in them as well. But probably the prize fish out of these warm water ponds are the largemouth bass. Additionally, around here, we have access, or you can as well gain access to several private ponds that hold very large trout. So there's the Finger Lakes
Fishing Preserve
Fishing Preserve
in Burdett.
in Burdett, New York, has a giant pond full of giant rainbow trout. Some years are better than others. These trout are subject to both winter and summer kills. He does stock this pond very heavily. Your average trout in there is 18 plus inches and football shaped because he has automatic feeders out there and he really likes to watch the fish feed. So he feeds them extensively.
Yeah, I think we've got some recent intel from the owner that he's no longer stocking.
Oh, he's no longer stocking trout there.
Yeah, I think it's because he had a bad die-off, but
He has had several bad die-offs. He has had some problems managing the pond just because of the amount of biomass he was trying to put in there. So when anything got tilted a little bit out of favor, I think it was quite catastrophic for him. He was putting lots of money into stocking lots of large trout in there. He couldn't put small trout in anymore because all the trout he had in there were big enough to eat all of the fingerlings that they may have put in. So
Yeah.
there are other pay-to-play areas. Rainbow Paradise. I think there might be a trip coming up there. Kirk, is that where you were going?
No, that wasn't where I was going. I was just going to expand on the Finger Lakes Preserve because we had started doing outings there. One of our members, Mike Gamasano, cares for the pond. And so we're kind of disappointed that he's decided not to stock any longer trout in his pond. Yeah, so Rainbow Paradise is a trip that's coming up on May 8th. And we have 2 weeks for members to register, and then we're going to open it up to everyone. We have a special deal where we got a discount rate for 20 folks. So the first 20 folks that sign up are going to get a discounted rate to go to Rainbow Paradise. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would agree with Kirk there. We've been before. It's a fun place. It gives you an opportunity to catch some large trout, catch some unusual trout as well. You can catch a nice banana colored palomino trout. Those are fun, if not much more than a novelty for us here in New York, since we don't stock those here. You also get the opportunity to catch a tiger trout. I went there with the express purpose of wanting to catch a tiger trout. I fished the whole day and finally managed to catch one that was maybe 3.25 inches. While Michael was reeling in hogs. I mean, I think he caught like a 19 and 18 and 15. And I'm fishing the same fly, same spot, his fly rod. And I can't manage to catch a tiger trout to save my life. But I finally managed to catch one, and I took a picture of it, and I have it in the palm of my hand, and the palm of my hand literally dwarfs the tiger trout. But I finally caught a tiger trout, so I was psyched. So we're going to go through some flies not to leave home with. So these are pictures of my boxes. These are always in my bag. Okay, the top picture there is a box of assorted soft hackles. The bottom box on the left-hand side, another box full of
Soft tackles.
soft hackles. So I carry tons of soft hackle flies. all different colors, sizes, shapes, for every situation. I have things that look like caddises. I have things that look like March Browns. I have things that look like stoneflies. Pretty much every hatch I can cover with that box or two of soft tackles there. If I need to, I can grease them up a little bit and fish them on top. I can add a little weight or poly leader and fish them down deeper. So that's sort of my all-purpose flies. Box on the right-hand side, full of my dry flies. Some of my dry flies. So these are ones that I typically carry all around. I've got parachutes, I've got standard Catskill styles, I've got sulfurs, I've got cripples, I've got emergers, sort of a little bit of everything in there. And that sort of varies though, how much and what I carry throughout the season. But typically I won't leave home without these 3 boxes. Those are always in my bag. Other things you should carry would include traditional Cahills,
Like you got nips.
elk hair caddis. Well, these are things they should carry, not things we should carry. I said they should carry. So these are things you should carry. You should carry traditional Catskill style dries in a variety of different colors, right? Ones that will cover the March Browns, Cahills, sulfurs as we get in later in the season, isonychias, gray foxes, some big ones to cover the big Cahills that we have. Some white flies, some hex-like patterns when we get some giant mayflies, some green drakes for if you're lucky enough to see 1 or 2 of them come off when you're down on the West Branch. Always have parachute Adams. Always have a parachute Adams in anywhere between like a size 20, which you buy because they're too small to tie for most of us, up to a size 10 or 12 at least. Have multiple parachute Adams in there. Other flies, we've shown some of these before. There's my Crelex. Down below it is my lead-eyed bugger. So that's the heavy sort of woolly bugger that I fish lots for trout, bass. Some days it's just super productive for everything. Don Austin's favorite fly, the Moto Minnow. Woolly buggers in a variety of different colors, shapes, and sizes. So in conclusion, what should you do? You should get in your car, throw all your fishing gear in there, go out and explore. There's tons of water around us. We're really blessed to be surrounded by the area that we have. For most of us, within a half an hour of our house, there's tons of water that fall into all these different categories. If we extend that circle a little bit wider to maybe an hour, we have even more water. And if we expand it to an hour-and-a-half drive, I mean, we're in the Catskills and all over the place. So it's really amazing. So we'll end just with a few extra fish shots here. Sort of the bounty of the season. Things
We
that
did
you
forget
may
that
or may not
walleye.
catch.
If you're fishing in Fall Creek in the spring, you might luck into one of the remaining walleye. In the early 2000s, the Lansing Rod and Gun Club stocked for 3 years in a row. They stocked, depending on who you talk to, let's call it 7,500 walleye fry a year for 3 years. I do not think the walleye are reproducing successfully because I've never caught a spike in Fall Creek, and I fish Fall Creek a lot. However, every year thereafter, people started catching a few walleye that were bigger. 3 years ago, I caught a 30-incher. Last year, I broke off one that probably was in the 34 or 35-inch range if I would have been lucky enough to land it, but I was fishing a 4-weight, trying to catch completely different fish, and I was fully not prepared for a giant walleye. But they are around, and people catch a couple every year. Oh, we got this. Oh, I dream of trout. Somebody dreams of trout and also likes graffiti. And I think that's it. So if anyone has questions, I think we'd be happy to answer some or turn it back over to Kurt.
Not seeing any questions at the moment.
That's good because we told you everything that we know.
Last comment we had was from Eric about some fish you guys caught using tenkara.
Now, on that pond, we were out one after, I think it was after a derby that we volunteered to run. Eric had a tenkara rod, and we decided to see if you could catch, these were 20+ inch rainbows that were fat.
Yeah, probably 4 or 5 pound.
Yeah,
minimum.
these were 4 or 5 pound plus rainbows. We wanted to see if you could catch them on Tenkara rod.
This is actually
and-
true. Okay.
Oh, and you
Yeah,
can.
this is true.
Oh, it's a blast. You'd hook it and then you run up the bank as fast as you can.
You have to run to the woods to try to drag the thing to shore.
Yeah,
to
you're
land it.
not fighting that thing. It's jumping and it's not happy about it, but it is pretty fun.
And I think we actually
Can you
broke.
stop sharing?
I think we actually broke Eric's Tenkara rod that day, and we probably owe him one. But
But
No,
we don't
you-
really want him to take Tenkara fish.
we don't
so-
want to encourage that behavior with Eric, so we're not going to buy him another one.
I was thankful to say goodbye to it. Didn't break that. And that was our mistakes.
So I'm not seeing any questions coming up on Facebook, but there was one that was discussed around, but it's worth asking you guys. So the question was, if fish gets a lamprey on it, does that mean the fish is dead? And secondly, if it's got a lamprey, does that change whether you can eat it or not?
So no and no. So lots of fish survive after lamprey attacks. Lampreys will be on them for some period of time. A lot of time they will fall off maybe during the fight, particularly with lake fish. If you're pulling them up from the deep, sometimes on lakers and stuff, the lampreys will fall off. A lot of times they fall off when you get them in the boat. And we catch a lot of fish that have lamprey scars on them. You can see a circular mark on the sides of the fish where they've obviously had something eating them and boring into their side. So they're quite resilient, actually. So, you know, fish can survive a lot more sort of than we oftentimes give them credit for. Lots of people get grief for their handling of fish and catch and release and how they handle them and how they photograph them. Fish are pretty resilient. They can fall over gorges and tumble down rocks and survive things like a lamprey drilling a hole into its side and sucking nutrients out of it, as well as heron attacks. We catch lots of fish with scars on them from all sorts of horrible injuries. So they do survive the lampreys. They do survive lots of other stuff. And as to whether or not you can eat them, they're perfectly fine to eat. Some people even eat lampreys. A friend of ours that's a guide has eaten lampreys. Some people, if you're curious and adventurous, you can eat the lampreys. They don't do anything toxic or poison to the fish. They simply bore into their side sort of and milk off the nutrients from the fish. So they are safe to eat still. The lampreys themselves are safe to eat, and they seem to have no lasting effects on the fish a lot of times, just a scar if they're lucky enough to survive.
Cool.
Can
I think that's more of a
Oh,
statement.
that's more of
than
a comment. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that we can answer for anybody before we turn it over to Kirk to wrap up? Okay, guys, thanks for all the attention. Thanks for tuning in and listening to us. It's always more fun to talk to people than just me and Michael sit around and talk to ourselves. So we enjoy having you.
Which
as
we
an
do a
audience.
lot, so.
Yeah.
We did it all,
Which we did all winter until we had
yeah,
to give this
all winter
presentation.
and most of the day yesterday, for a couple hours before this meeting.
All right, well, I want to thank Mike and Josh for the presentation. Thank you to Eric for tying. Hey, I want to welcome all of you that are hooking in with us live. I think we had upwards almost to 45 people when you look between Facebook and Zoom. So thank you. Also, some of the folks have bought Broad raffle tickets, so thank you for supporting our clubs. Look forward to seeing you in May for the Kelly Gallup talk. We're really jazzed up about that, to work together with our friends at Leon Chandler to host Kelly Gallup. So we'll see you in May. That would be May 3rd, right? Yes. Yes. And until then, we wish you good fishing and get out there and enjoy this amazing spring.
Great presentation, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks for tying, Eric. Unbelievable stuff tonight.
Very good, very good.
Thanks,
Very
guys. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Glad to help out a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for tying for us, Eric. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good stuff, guys.
Thanks.
Sorry again about your Tenkara rod.
Not really.
That was a favor. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
We felt like it was a public service. So, I mean,
It was one of those things where I'm like, in the winter, my hands get cold, and like if I have a Tenkara rod, there's no line getting pulled in through my fingers, so my hands will stay warmer. It was the George Daniels thing, so I bought one for like $40 from China off of like Amazon or something, and it was terrible. And it was great to find the pond to just goof off with it. It was like the perfect thing. And then it broke, and I was like, sweet, I experimented. Now I'm good. I'm satisfied.
I'm not gonna lie. It was pretty fun while it lasted.
It was fun.
Yeah.
They did have one last question, if you guys have time. And any
Yeah,
experience fishing the Finger Lakes in the summer or fall? I think they're specifically talking about in the lake.
In the lake. So in the lakes in the summer is a little difficult. You really do need a boat for the most part. You know, the fish are a little bit deeper. If you're looking for fish in the lake and you got a kayak or a canoe, you can kind of run around the edges and fish docks, and you can pick up the largemouth or the smallmouth here and there, and obviously some sunnies and some perch. But the bigger fish are going to be deep. One of the styles that's been brought here by a lot of the Finger Lakes guides, particularly John Dolke, who's a local guide with Finger Lakes Angling Zone. They brought from the West Coast, they adapted deep water vertical jigging, which is basically figuring out at what depth the fish are hanging out in the lake during the high part of the summer, and then dropping big ounce to ounce and a half jigs with with rubber bodies on them, 6 to 10 inch long tails, fluke tails on them, and vertical jigging. They're at depths in the summer that for fly rods are, I don't want to say completely impossible, but are pretty much completely impossible.
Yeah, I mean, they're at 150,
They're at
200
100.
feet.
They're between 110 and 180 feet, which is where they're targeting them. They're catching, Lakers and Browns and the occasional landlock. You can do some variant with a kayak or a canoe, trolling streamers in the summer. Again, finding drop lines in that edge line where it goes from maybe 30 to 60 feet rather quickly. Pulling big streamers along with a sinking line on a kayak. We'll occasionally pull up a landlock or occasionally even a brown here and there. The summer in the lake is not particularly easy just because of the depth at which most of the fish are. In the fall, the Lakers tend to move into shallower water to spawn. Our lake trout spawn in gravel beds that's between 25 and 35 feet deep. One of the most well-known beds is off the shore of Taganek. And that is where, in fact, DC nets a lot of the lake trout that they use for the stocking program throughout New York State. So from Taganek, with a fly rod or with conventional gear and, half ounce to 3/4 ounce jigs or spoons or Castmasters, you can target the Lakers in the fall, usually starting around early mid-October, right after the lake flips again. So the lake will flip from hot water to cold water a couple times a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, where the warmer water on the top and the cooler water on the bottom sort of switch places. Generally, the spawn will start in the fall after the thermocline swaps. And in the winter is actually for fly rods. If you're a fly fisher and you want to fish the lakes, the winter is really the time to be out on the lakes. The thing is, particularly with the winter, is that you're looking for the days that are best for fishing the lakes in the winter with a fly rod are the days that you least want to be out on the water. You want wind. I would say the more the better, but with a fly rod, you don't really want a wind that's more than 10 to 15 miles an hour. You want it to be coming out of on most of our lakes, you sort of want it to be coming out of the northwest. So you want kind of that southeast blowing wind. And on those days and in those conditions, you want to find points. And you want to fish the downwind side of the points. What happens is the wind will cause waves. The waves will crash on the points. The points upside of on the windward side of the points, the waves will crash. They'll knock out bait fish, and the bait fish will flow off onto the leeward side of that point, and the big fish will hang in the drop offs. Anywhere from, what you really want to find is that water that drops from what I'll call shallow of 15 feet to that deeper spot that's going to be 30 or more feet deep. And you want to see these drops that happen fairly quick transitionally. And in the winter, it's great. I mean, I fish a fly rod in the winter all year long, and just it's one of those things. It's kind of low probability that you're going to catch a fish, but when you catch fish, they're going to be big. I generally don't catch much in the lake that's in the winter, at least, that's much below 20 inches. And most of the fish that I catch are, particularly when they're Lakers, are in the 25 to 30 inch range. You never know what you're going to catch. It could be Lakers, it could be landlocks, it could be browns,
Could be a carp.
there could be a carp, it could be bass, it could be pike. But the summer is a little hard. The spring is not as bad. The spring, just find the mouths of the tribs and tool around there, and you'll have either pre-spawn fish waiting to go in, or you'll have post-spawn fish dropping back. The challenge for me in the spring is that there's so little. I've got relatively little time given kids in a job, and I want to find the fish that I like fishing soft tackles. So I'm going to fish for trout in freestyle streams with soft tackles as much as I possibly can in the spring. So I don't really play with the lake a lot. I'm generally in the lake starting in December, and I'll fish in the lake until March.
Cool. Very good. Good questions. Thanks, guys. Awesome night.
So thanks again. Yeah, great information.
Enjoyed
Good
it.
seeing everybody. Great turnout.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care then.
Thanks, guys. Time to go watch Gonzaga.
Sadly, not Michigan.
Hey.
Thank you now.
Hey, Shahab.
Hey, Shahab.
Good night, y'all. Thank you.
Night.
Thanks for tuning in, Shahab.
Yeah, man. Until next time, stay tuned.
Yeah.
Right on.